I'm Jeff Mortensen. I'm the interim president and CEO at 360 Communities, and I want to thank you for being here. As you know, 360 Communities has gone through some recent leadership changes, and I want you to know that we have a highly committed and supportive board of directors who established a search committee right away and are working to hire a recruiting firm to handle the search process and the hiring process for the next CEO. And yes, the question I always get asked, I am putting my name into that application process, so they're looking at both internal and external candidates for that. But welcome to the 27th Annual Domestic Abuse Awareness Luncheon. Thank you so much for being here. We've got a great turnout. We've got about 300 people was the last count somewhere in there that I heard. Fantastic turnout. Thank you. This is a unique event. It is certainly unique for Dakota County and Minnesota and possibly even in the nation to have an awareness event like this. And it wouldn't be made possible if it weren't for our presenting sponsor. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor for their generosity and their contributions. It's M&I BMO Harris Bank. If I could get people from M&I BMO Harris Bank to please stand, and let's thank them for their contributions.
I just want to introduce myself. My name is Shannon Lee, and I am a vice president with M&I, a part of BMO Financial Group, soon to be BMO Harris Bank. And I'm also the bank manager for our location here in Lakeville. So, we're here to support 360 Communities because of their proven track record of helping those most in need throughout Dakota County. So we're very proud to be a sponsor today. Personally, as a volunteer, I've been with 360s for about 6 years now, and I started out, doing just the, the food drives and the school supply drive and, Armful of Love and all those great things. And about 4 years ago, I was very blessed to become a part of the Lewis House and offering financial literacy classes out there. And then about 2-3 years ago, Lori Reeb, where's Lori? Oh, there she is. For those who know Lori, she's very persuasive. She says to me, come be a volunteer for the golf event to do the raffle. So I said, great, of course, I'll come help. I'm now the chair of the 19th annual Lewis House golf event. So Lori's great. She's good at talking you into that stuff. But this year in particular, the golf event is going to be extremely exciting. And since we're here for the Lewis House, I'll put in a little bit of a plug. It's on August 21st. It's a women's event, but why I'm so excited is this is the 19th year, and not only this year do we think that we're going to raise more money in a single year that we ever have, but this is the year that we're going to hit $500,000 that this golf event alone has raised for the Lewis House. So it is, yeah, a round of applause, because everybody who's helped, it's a great, great event. So. But, above all, on behalf of M&I, a part of BMO Financial Group, a part soon to be BMO Harris Bank. Yes, that's fun. You guys can laugh at that. So we just really want to thank 360 Communities for everything that they have done, everything that they're doing now, and everything that you guys will continue to do to raise awareness for domestic abuse. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to thank Flora Etc. for the contribution of the centerpieces that are at your table, as well as Costco, who donated the dessert at the tables as well. And I also want to acknowledge Steve Allen and Michael Bonert and Don Hendrickson and the rest of the Brackets Crossing team. They always do a fantastic job with events and our gracious hosts. So thank you so much. At 360 Communities, we uncover domestic abuse. We do that throughout all our services. So whether it's the work that we're doing with early childhood or school success, certainly our violence prevention work, or our self-sufficiency work at the food shelves, we do that in a way that we are intentional about uncovering domestic abuse. But I want to acknowledge the core group of our staff. We have a highly committed and wonderful group of staff, and I'm honored to be able to help lead through this transition period. Highly committed people, but I want to thank and just call out those people that work at the Egan Lewis House and the Hastings Lewis House that day in and day out work in emotionally charged situations to help victims, women and children, of domestic abuse. Could you please stand up? Staff that are here from the Lewis houses. Thank you so much. And here's the ask. So we need court advocates. We're looking for volunteers to serve as court advocates. If you yourself are interested in that, or if you know somebody who are interested in or might be interested in being a court advocate, we will provide the training. The requirement is you need some flexibility during the day, but that is a really important role that we're looking for volunteers to help us with. If you're interested or if you know somebody, please either talk with one of the staff that was standing or contact Catherine Archambault. She's here as well. She's right there raising her hand. She's our resource development manager, handles the volunteer side of things, and her phone number is 952-985-4017. It is, we've been very fortunate for the last 27 years to have a fantastic supportive partner in the Lakeville PD. What a great relationship and what a great history. And at this time, it is my honor and privilege to welcome Police Chief Von Hoff, our co-host partner.
Thank you, Jeff. On behalf of the men and women of the Lakeville Police Department and the City of Lakeville, it is also my great pleasure to welcome you to the 27th Annual Domestic Abuse Awareness Luncheon. So I look across the room here. Every year I see the same faces, which is great, and I see people from every type of discipline. I see law enforcement people, I see prosecutors, I see elected officials, all coming together with a singular determination to end domestic violence in our communities. And before I get going here, I would like to talk a little bit about leadership. And I'd like the sheriff and the county attorney to stand up. If we could give them a round of applause. It's our elected people here. And I'm going to ask them to stay standing. And I'd like all of the other elected officials in the room to stand up right now. I know that we have school board members, we have city council members. If you could please stand up if you're an elected person. Thank you very much. A round of applause for these folks. The unique thing about this luncheon is drawing attention to domestic abuse and domestic violence in our communities. And the power of this is everyone coming together. Now, those of you who have heard me speak before probably know that I have a tendency to be somewhat lengthy. And especially when I'm a little bit passionate about a topic such as domestic abuse. And whenever I talk to a group, I think of a story that happened a few years ago. And it started when my younger brother, who's significantly younger than me, called me up at work one day, and he said, Tom, he said, do you have one of those car seat inspection programs? As he and his wife had just had a new child, my darling niece, Marina. And I said, yes, we do. We have a great car seat inspection program. And so he said, well, is it possible that I could get my car seat inspected? And I said, yes, you can. All you have to do is call our evidence room manager, who's Lori Clemmer, and she performs car seat inspections. So next day he calls her up, makes an appointment, comes down a few days later, has the car seat inspected. The next day after that, he calls me up. And he says, you know, she did an outstanding job. She's very professional. She was very knowledgeable, and she's just outstanding. He said, oh, well, thank you. I said, I'll pass it on to her. So later that day, I walked down to Lori's office. And I said, which is right adjacent to our evidence room. And I said, Lori, I just wanted to let you know my brother John called me up, and he said, you did a great job. He said you were very professional and everything. And she said, oh, that's very nice to know, Chief. Thank you very much. And so I turned, and I started walking out, and I stopped. And I said, "So Lori, I know you've never met my brother before. What'd you think of him?" And she said, "Well, he's just like you, Chief." And I stopped and I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" She goes, "He talks too much." So I'll try and keep my comments brief this morning. I had a 45-minute speech, but it won't be that long. I'll keep it to 5 minutes. You know, these are very, very difficult times for those of us who work to end domestic violence in our communities. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that we are living through historically difficult economic times that stress individuals, they stress families, and they stress organizations alike. Our law enforcement services we've trained our officers, we've established STAR teams, we've improved our response over the years. Our criminal prosecutions through stronger laws, through enhanced penalties, through mandatory sentences have improved. We've improved our services to victims. And yet, after 27 years, we still have challenges. In the last year, hundreds of times, officers and deputies in this county responded to domestic violence calls and either made a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor assault arrest. And 58 times, people were arrested for felony-level strangulation and domestic assaults by Court County Attorney Jim Backstrom's office. It would be easy to become disheartened after 27 years of trying to put an end to domestic violence in our communities, if you thought about that. But as I thought about this, I thought, you know, there's really two types of people in the world. There are those people who see things for what they really are and say that's just the way it is. And then there are those people that say that's the way things are, but we can make a difference. You know, there's a speech on the wall of my office. On one wall of my office, I have a speech. It's the text of a speech. And it's the I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I love this speech. He delivered it on August 28th of 1963 on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And I love this speech not only because of the words in it, but I love it because of the optimism that this speech engenders. And you have to think of the context of the time that this speech was given in. This is the height of the civil rights struggle in our country. And it's really a dark hour. And what does he say? He says, change will come. And it's because it's the right thing to do. And I got to tell you, as a law enforcement officer, there's one sentence in that speech that hits my heart. And the sentence is, injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. Domestic violence in any home threatens safety in every home in our communities. And I'd just like to leave you with that. I told you I'd make my comments short this morning, but that's really where we're going. And this morning, we're going to be honoring 5 people who really took a look at things and they said, this is the reality of what domestic violence is, but we can have an impact. We can change it for the victims. We can reduce the instance of domestic violence in our communities. And we're going to be honoring those people in a few moments. I'd also like to thank M&I BMO Bank for their donations. We really could not do this without them. And this is really the opportunity that we have in the metro area to talk about issues of domestic violence. So I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate everyone coming back every year for this. And I'm serious, I see the same faces every year, which is great, that you show your support and your determination in ending domestic violence in your communities. Thank you very much. Now we have 5 awards here. This is a Community Caring Award from 360's Communities, and I'm going to call Bill Nelson up here. And I'm going to have to put on my glasses because this is a significant recognition, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bill. For the past 25 years, Bill Nelson has been an advocate for services for women experiencing trauma from abuse, as well as victims of prostitution. In 1999 session of the Minnesota Legislature, Bill and 2 part-time associates presented a plan for a women's recovery residential center and received a direct appropriation of $600,000. This treatment program opened in 2000 and to date has treated over 1,000 women. The program specializes in treatment for trauma, chemical dependency, and mental illness. He has published 2 professional journal articles describing the program and reported a follow-up study indicating 89% rate of success. Further, he co-produced a documentary with TPT to illustrate the consequences of the abuse of women. He testified before Congress in connection with the passage of the Second Chance Act targeting the problem of women in criminal justice and the need to provide alternative, considering the fact that they are victims rather than perpetrators. He was invited twice to lecture at the prestigious universities of Gothenburg and Stockholm, the focus being women's healing from sexual and emotional abuse. He has carried his message to 4 states by conducting whole community strategic planning sessions to develop a compassionate approach to the victims of prostitution and abuse. Finally, he has served 6 years as a board member, treasurer on the former Community Action Council. He continues to be a lecturer, a resource person at most metropolitan colleges and universities, and has had a specialty lecture at Brown College as an adjunct faculty specializing in women in criminal justice from a feminist point of view. Congratulations, Bill. Step up here.
As I was driving to this event, I made a pledge to myself that I wanted to say a few words, but no longer than a minute or two. And having heard the police chief from Lakeville, I've changed my mind. Now, I'm, believe it or not, 71 years old. Last week, I was interviewing a person who wanted to become a chemical dependency counselor. And she and I talked about different eras over time, and I mentioned my age, and it was like a shockwave went through her. And she commented, "You don't look a day over 59. She got the job. But I know, as you know, that I look not a day over 70. Getting serious, as a board member some years ago, I had as much knowledge as you might get in the media. But I went through my orientation, and it was at the Lewis House. And there I was introduced to domestic abuse, and I was shocked. And I said to myself, I'm in the right place. And here was a woman, again, years ago, who had complained to the authorities that she was being beaten, that she wanted prosecution, and they basically said, no, there's not enough evidence. And she was frustrated because it was going on, and she put together a little plan. She got a shopping bag, and one of the methods her abuser used on her was to pull out her hair. And she came back with the shopping bag 3/4 full of her own hair, and prosecution commenced. But it took that much for that to happen. Now, this award is an award, but to me it is much more meaning. It really represents an affirmation. And in this day and age, you know, you don't often get affirmations. So I treasure this, and I just have to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'd now like to call up Burnsville officers, Steve Adrian, Christy Carpenter, and former Burnsville officer Gary Litster and Sergeant Tom Kelly. If you could all come on up here. In 1994, the Burnsville Police Department responded to the alarmingly high number of 1,044 domestic violence calls, resulting in 80 arrests. Burnsville police officers Gary Litster, Steve Adrian, Christy Carpenter recognized domestics as one of the most violent calls for service for victims and officers alike. They took the initiative to learn more about domestics, the dynamics of domestic violence, through specialized training and a partnership with the B. Robert Lewis House. Through their initiative, the Burnsville Domestic Violence Unit was developed allowing targeting of arrest and non-arrest situations or any other problem domestics to prevent repeat calls. With the coordination support of Sergeant Tom Kelly, the unit developed into a domestic abuse response team, or a DART team as we know them today, which has been credited for an innovative response to domestic violence and have trained numerous agencies across Minnesota and ultimately developed a model to countless agencies for the past 17 years. Because of their strong commitment, Officers Gary Litzter, Steve Adrian, Christy Carpenter, and Sergeant Tom Kelly have truly made a difference in the lives of domestic violence victims and family safety in Burnsville and many other communities across the state, including Lakeville, because we have a DART team modeled after their team, as do many other agencies. Round of applause for these officers. It's kind of hard to get cops to talk, but I think we can prevail on it.
Hello, everybody. When I got the call the other day to attend this luncheon, I attended this. I've been retired 10 years. I attended this years ago, and I'm always impressed by all of the agencies that get involved to help with domestic violence. When I started in police work, it was actually 42 years ago. So if you do the math, I became a cop when I was 5. And but I remember back in the 70s, there was 2 crimes, DWI and domestic violence, that we treated a lot differently, for good or for bad. It wasn't commonplace, but it was accepted. DWIs, you just give the guy a ride home, park the car, give the guy a ride home. Domestic violence was a family deal. What could police do when they went in there and there had been violence and something been going on for a long time? And thankfully that changed. Prosecution was difficult because the victim, as we all know, often recanted, and the system requires a victim to be cooperative there, and because of all the elements of this crime, it wasn't always possible. So a team that we created at the police department level, certainly it's nice to be recognized today, but I remember 3 names came to mind with the then CAC in the Lewis House. Jolene Evenson with the Lewis House was part of our team, and 2 city prosecutors without whom, we couldn't have got anything into the system. Kevin Eide and Mike Mayer. So Jolene and Kevin and Mike and us, we really dedicated ourselves to hopefully preventing at some level violence against women. And so I just want to thank, none of us operate out in the front lines. We always like to be behind the scenes, so hopefully I speak for my friends here in thanking. I look out here and the Dakota County citizens are really fortunate to have this group. They really are. They don't know how good they have it for all of you working as you do. And I want to thank Tom, because I know LPD has been a big push in keeping this out in the people's minds. So thanks to LPD and 360s. It's 360 now, communities? Okay. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
On behalf of 360s communities and the Lakeville Police Department, I'd like to congratulate all of the award winners. We could have a round of applause for them as well.
Thank you. In 2006, our guest speaker became the first woman elected to represent the state of Minnesota in the United States Senate. Since then, Senator Amy Klobuchar has been a strong advocate for Minnesotans' values on the critical issues facing our nation. From promoting long-term economic growth and job creation to bringing fiscal responsibility and accountability to Washington, from supporting our Minnesota businesses, workers, and farmers to develop homegrown energy. A former Hennepin County prosecutor, Senator has worked across party lines to pass legislation that represents the interests of the people of Minnesota, including providing full funding for the I-35W bridge, working with the Minnesota National Guard to support the Beyond the Yellow Ribbon program, and helping Minnesota families with everything from adoptions to consumer issues. Throughout her career, Klobuchar has been a strong advocate for domestic violence awareness and prevention. In 2009, Senator introduced a bipartisan resolution against domestic violence, calling for the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Last year, Senator Klobuchar introduced the Stalkers Act of 2011, which would strengthen and update federal anti-stalking laws to address the new technology predators are using to harass their victims. Language similar to this bipartisan legislation has been included in the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2011, which was released from the Judiciary Committee earlier this month. Senator Klobuchar also introduced the Support for Survivors Act, which would assist victims of sexual trauma in the military by requiring the Department of Defense to ensure lifelong storage of all documents connected with reports of sexual assaults and sexual harassment across all branches of the U.S. military. Senator is a member of the Judiciary Committee, Commerce Committee, Agricultural Committee, and Joint Economic Committee. Working Mother magazine named Klobuchar as 2008 Best in Congress. The American Prospect named her a woman to watch. The Star Tribune has called her a fast-moving legislator, while the Washington Post has described her as a rising star. Amy and her husband John have a 15-year-old daughter, Abigail, who is in her junior year, so she's 16, junior year of high school. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. The first thing I want to say is, aren't you excited about the Lakeville North girls hockey team? Okay? They won their first game. We are very excited for them. With the tournament to many games to come, I'm sure, ahead in this tournament. And it is wonderful to be here with all of you and to be back in Lakeville, and especially to see so many friends here, your chief and your sheriff. They just told me they were going to do the polar plunge tomorrow. Is that right? Okay, I've never done that, so that's really good. And then also your great county attorney, Jim Backstrom. He and I worked together when I was Hennepin County Attorney. We were on the board of the County Attorneys Association, so we did a lot of work statewide, and I think you all know what a great leader he is. And also what a great Elvis impersonator he is. When I used to do like some of the parades in the Twin Cities, like the Aquatennial Parade, of course, not everyone was from Hennepin County, duh, right? And so I'd meet people, and they say, when I was county attorney, they'd say, well, I'm not from your county, I'm from Dakota County. And then I'd always say, oh, you have a great county attorney, and he does a really good Elvis imitation. And he'd say to me, could you maybe say something else besides that when you talk about me? But he's a good friend. And I also wanted to recognize Ann Sheridan for her work with the Robert Lewis House and the 360 Communities Board, all the staff. Thank you for your longstanding commitment to women and everything that you have done. Now, I think you know we're really talking about this issue at an incredibly critical time, because even though we've made great headway in recent years, and we truly have with domestic violence, it's no longer just something that people don't want to talk about and gets hidden away. It's no longer about women coming to work with black eyes and bruises and no one pretending it's happening. Things have greatly changed, and it's obviously changed the way that we view these crimes and been really good for law enforcement and good for the community. But at the same time, I think you know we have a lot more work to do. We're seeing some major budget cuts in Washington, and I can tell you those of us that care about this issue have fight every day to make sure that we don't see those cuts taken on the backs of those that can least afford them, victims of domestic violence, the law enforcement, the police and sheriff's deputies, prosecutors, defense lawyers in this room that really do the work every day that handle these cases. When we had the VAWA reauthorization hearing I think it was last month, my colleagues, as usual, were fighting about a totally different issue, about the confirmation of judges, and I finally said, excuse me, could we get back to the topic at hand? And I told the story, the sad, sad story of the Lake City police officer, Officer Schneider, who reported, as you all know, to a domestic violence call and was shot down by a mentally unstable perpetrator, someone who had just come back actually from serving our country and was in a domestic violence dispute, and the officer showed up and he shot Officer Schneider down. And I was at that funeral in Lake City with the governor and others, all the law enforcement there. I'm sure some members of your department were there. And just to see those three little kids walk down that church aisle. The little girl with her blue dress with stars all over it. It reminded you not only of the amazingly difficult work and courageous work that law enforcement does every day, but of the repercussions of domestic violence. There's not only just one victim, it's a whole family, and in this case, that's shooting an entire community. And that's why I want to thank you so much for the work that you do, and can tell you that when I told that story at the judiciary hearing, everyone stopped fighting about the judges. And we got back, and we eventually got the bill out of the committee. The Violence Against Women Act was a landmark bill. It first became law in 1994, and it started a sea change in the attitudes about violence against women. It sent a strong message to the country saying that sexual assault and domestic violence are serious offenses that will not be tolerated. Now, Minnesota, I think, was probably one of the states that most took a lead on this issue. We tend to have really progressive, enlightened law enforcement. And we also have organizations like 360 Communities. The Lewis House was the first shelter in the United States to be built specifically for the purpose of housing battered women. Okay, I didn't know that, so that's an amazing fact. And you, in fact, here in this community and in Dakota County have been holding this lunch for 27 years, right? I think you saw this long before it came on in the national stage, so I thank you for that. I would also say that one of the reasons Minnesota got so involved with this on the federal level was that Paul and Sheila Wellstone took this on as their #1 cause. I don't know if you know, but Senator Wellstone's brother, Stephen, had long suffered from mental illness all the time when he was growing up. And it gave Paul this special place for people who had no one fighting for themselves, whether it was victims of domestic violence, whether it was mentally ill people. And that was part of what he brought to the Senate. So that when I ever meet people like the tram operators or the policemen that are at the front door and women at the front door of the Capitol, every time I say I'm from Minnesota, they remember Paul because he treated everyone the same, no matter where they were from, and the senators were treated the same as the guy that operates the tram, Darren, who's still there. And so it's no surprise that they took this issue on and that Sheila took it on. I think it made a big difference to our state. Now, when I was county attorney, some of the work that they had done, we already saw it coming to fruition. I was started there in '98, and as you know, Hennepin County, which is sees a few more domestic violence cases just because of its size, has the Domestic Violence Service Center, which was one of the first of its kind in the nation, one-stop place where people could come and navigate the red tape of the courthouse. It's even hard for lawyers sometimes over in Hennepin County. So when you try to expect victims of domestic assault to try to figure out where to get a restraining order and where to bring a case and where to find out about a shelter, it made sense to have everything in one place. And actually that started under Mike Freeman, my predecessor and my successor in the job, and we simply continued that work and extended it some to working with the hospital so that doctors and nurses would be looking out for victims of domestic violence, and work with the shelter, and did some other things with people who couldn't speak English and making sure that they understood that these services were available, and it continues strong today, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done. So the statistics and why we need to keep working on this, I don't need to tell you this. More than 1 in 3 women in the U.S. have experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking in their lifetime. Every year, close to 17,000 people in this lose their lives to domestic violence. This isn't just a family matter, as I mentioned from the story of Sean Schneider, Officer Schneider. This is something that, in fact, affects the entire community. So where do we go from here in this time of tough budget cuts on the federal level? I'd say the first thing is that we have learned a lot. We've learned a lot about what it takes to prosecute a domestic violence case, collecting that evidence at the scene right away, going in, taking those pictures immediately, interviewing the kids at the scene, understanding that while there may be a prosecution, there may also be a child protection matter, having prosecutors willing to move forward even when the victim recants or starts backing away from the prosecution. These are all things that I know even 10, 15 years ago weren't the way of doing business, and they've become increasingly the way of doing business so that we can get better results. I just did a forum in the city of Minneapolis wasn't always known for doing that great a job on the domestic violence cases, and I think they've something like doubled their rate of prosecution. So we know that things can improve, and that we have to also coordinate, and Jim knows this, between the misdemeanor prosecutors, the misdemeanor cases, and the felony cases, so that if there's any way to bump it up, that we're able to bump it up. So that's the work on the local level that must continue. In terms of the Senate and the work we can do on the federal level, it's to continue to support the COPS program and the burden grant program. There have been cuts recently, but a lot of us fought just tooth and nail to make sure the programs remained. I always look at where we were before we had those programs on the federal level, when the actually city of Minneapolis ended up on the front page of the New York Times, and they called it Murderapolis, and where we've come from there, where we've gotten much lower murder rates than we did when we had gangs running rampant, and when we had less coordination between federal and local law enforcement, between the county levels of law enforcement. And a lot of that happened because we were willing to invest in cops on the street, on the front line, and it makes a big difference. And so it just horrifies me to think we're going to start backing away. And obviously you don't see the results right away when you do that. Maybe it's like 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And so I'm going to fight to keep those programs in place. I know the Vice President, Joe Biden, has always been not only a huge supporter of the VAWA bill, but also of money for cops on the federal level. So hopefully we'll have a voice and someone that will work with us on this every single day. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are in this new VAWA bill, the one that we just talked about that got through the Judiciary Committee, which, by the way, isn't always an easy thing to do. It tends to be a very strong committee when you can get agreement, but always a difficult committee if anyone watches the Supreme Court hearings. The things that are new in this bill right now, first of all, acknowledging the budget situation. There's some consolidation of programs, which the domestic violence community is basically in favor of, to try to find out how we can save money with duplicative programs. Greater flexibility for the use of grant money. Anyone out there always likes to hear that. By adding more purpose areas for how you can use the money. Training requirements for people providing legal assistance to domestic violence. Some steps that can be taken to address the disproportionately high domestic violence rates in the Native American community. There's a lot of focus, and I don't think we've heard about this as much in Minnesota, but a lot of focus on how much of the bill should be devoted to DNA rape kits. There's huge backlogs, some in Minnesota, some across the country, and if there should be a certain percentage of put in for how much of the VAWA money can be spent on sexual assault and how much on domestic violence. So we should watch that and make sure that domestic violence keeps strong, but at the same time, getting some extra assistance to work on the DNA backlogs would be a good thing. The bill includes legislation that I wrote along with Kay Bailey Hutchinson, the Republican senator from Texas, on internet and stalking and the use of cyber for stalkers. This came out of the incident of Erin Andrews, the ESPN reporter who was changing her clothes in her hotel room, and this stalker, looked through, maybe you guys have heard about this, looked through the peephole and filmed her and then put it out on the internet. And it was very difficult to prosecute that case, and so she's become a huge advocate for doing something more on some of the cyber stalking issues. That was probably one of the most amusing press conferences I've ever done in Washington, and I've had some weird ones. So there I am with Erin Andrews. Okay, she's really tall and has really big hair, and the House author of the bill, and they had questions and answers, and literally there's about 20 cameras there, right, from all over the nation, because she was kind of famous, and so there we are. And the House author said to me, "Why don't you answer all the questions?" So I go, okay. So we're marching through the bill. People are asking substantive questions, and I have to take like 7 questions in a row, and really they just want to hear from Erin Andrews. So finally some guy asked, while I'm at the microphone, says, "Well, how did it feel to get asked to be on Dancing with the Stars?" And I said, "Was that addressed to me?" Anyway, it was clearly to her. We are working to get that bill, and the fact that it's part of the VAWA bill is the way to go to get it done and put some extra tooth in the law, as we're seeing more and more sophisticated ways to commit some of the old crimes, basically, as opposed to getting someone's phone number and stalking them or going and looking through their window. People are more and more using the internet, and we have to be aware of that. The military assault bill that Jeff mentioned, this is really an amazing thing. This is one where I got all 17 women senators, Democrat and Republicans, on the bill, and then I knew we would never lose. And it was fascinating because I don't think people ever knew this, and I didn't want to make a big deal. For the most part, the military, we all know in Minnesota with our incredible National Guard, does amazing work. So I didn't want to do this big bashing of them and act like there were predators everywhere, which we know that's such a small minority, so you probably didn't hear about this. But somewhere in the middle of this, we found out that the sexual assault records, when there's a report of sexual assault in the military, the records get destroyed, depending if it's the Army or Marines, in 1 to 5 years. And then there's no record at all. And there were cases of people going out, maybe getting acquitted, or in some maybe not being charged, and then they go out and they commit a rape, and there's no records, nothing there anymore. And so the women senators all said, could we just keep these preserved, not make them public, but keep them preserved for 50 years, so at least they're there for these reports, because there were numerous examples of this. And we won, and it got included in the National Defense Reauthorization Act, which is all the funding for the troops. Senator McCain helped me a lot, as did Senator Levin. And so it was one of those little victories you don't really talk about, but it's just an example of changing cultures in the military as you see more women going in the military, as well as reflected in what you see in your community every single day. And last thing I just wanted to end with was why I care so much about this issue and why I see it as I started with a community issue is that the case that I will never forget involving domestic violence was the case of a couple in Eden Prairie, and they're from Russia. And they had moved from Russia, and it was clear that the guy just sort of kept her in the house. She never met many people. They didn't have really any friends. And I think there had been one report of domestic abuse, a pretty minor one. And so it isn't really one of those stories of, oh, no one in the community followed up on the cases. There just wasn't much. But it turned out later, the investigation showed that there was significant domestic abuse. And so one day, the guy, they had a 4-year-old daughter. She was in the house, and he killed his wife, and he ended up then going to Home Depot, getting a saw. It was just gruesome, cutting her up, putting her in the back of a car and driving to Missouri with the kid in the car, and leaving a part of her body there, and then driving up to the Twin Cities, and somehow decided to come in and confess. And so we have a great situation I consider here that we videotape these things. He's on so the jury can see it, where they were saying, well, what did you do then? Oh, because he was claiming I was just, I did it on a, I was mentally unstable when I did it, and he just looks really cold at the camera. He said, well, I went to church, I lit a candle, and what did you do then? Well, I went to the Home Depot and got a saw, just like that. But the reason I tell the story is that the only people at that funeral were me and our domestic violence advocate from our office at this Russian Orthodox church with the family. The whole family was in Russia. So the parents come in, and then the sister comes in, who is the twin sister, the identical twin sister of the victim. So they arrive at the church, and the little girl is there with some child protection people, the little 4-year-old girl. And to see her run up to that sister that she had never seen, her mom's identical twin sister, and say, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," because she was identically looked like her mother, and grab her, made you realize that this isn't just about one victim, it's about an entire community. And this is a community that gets it. You've gotten it for 27 years to come together with law enforcement and to come together with advocates and people from the criminal justice system and the judiciary makes me feel so much better about where we're headed. And I'll just pledge to you that I want to work with you and your county attorney and law enforcement on anything that we can do to move this along and to keep strong, because as far as you go, you always know there are people pushing you back. When you think of what happened to Officer Schneider, you know that we haven't gotten as far as we want to get, and there's a lot more work to be done, and I know it can be done by the people in this room. Thank you for having me.
Just want to thank you all for being here. The support is great. There's a lot we still need to do. We're doing great work, but there's a lot we still need to do. I encourage you, the wonderful representation for me in this room is that We've got so many different pieces of the spectrum here. I encourage you to have those conversations and those dialogues across silos. That's where the innovation and the change is going to happen. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for the people that presented. Enjoy the afternoon.